For some more opinion on this, we're joined by KPMG's lead economist, Frank Blackmore. Thank you very much, Frank, for joining us this evening. So the outlook changes very suddenly at the moment as we continue to see macroeconomic volatility. Are we expecting any major about turns or changes in approach to counter that volatility?
I don't think we are. I think, if anything, this is a budget that might return the National Treasury to sort of a long-term trend. You know, we've gone through a couple of years now with COVID and the resulting aftermath that has resulted in a number of budget statements that have had to be adaptive to the current situations, finding vaccines, paying for people who are unemployed, etc. And this budget might be the first one that tries to return to some degree of normality on that front.
With higher than expected revenue collection, it's going to be interesting to see what the money's going to be spent on. But South Africans are not likely to be impressed if that's swallowed up by bailouts for state-owned entities instead of on stimulating economic growth.
True, and there's a lot of speculation in the market that it may be spent on especially SOEs other than Eskom, that is Transnet. We know they need a large injection of capital. And of course, if it resulted in a change in service delivery, perhaps it would be more palatable. But if it's more money into a black hole, that might not be that great.
So public sector wage negotiations currently a hot talking point as labour action is imminent. How do you think the issue is going to be handled by the Minister tomorrow?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one. We've heard that the National Treasury has pledged to reduce the burden of the public sector wage bill. But there again, we have some precedent this year in Transnet getting a 7% increase. Eskom getting a 7% increase, Transnet coming in with a 6% increase. So it seems unlikely that the public sector union would settle for far less than that. And if one just calculates perhaps a 6.5% increase for this year and 5% for next year, you're already swallowing up something like an additional 180 billion rands over the medium-term period, or 60 billion per year, which is, you know, compared to the windfall of 100 billion that you previously indicated may result, is a large amount of money.
You mentioned black holes that need to be filled a little bit earlier. There are so many other holes, not necessarily black holes, that need to be filled. For instance, social spending. A lot of South Africans desperate to see that social relief of distress grant extended. What are you specifically going to be looking out for tomorrow in that speech in terms of spending?
So I think there are two issues here. The one more permanent issue would be all the talk about these social relief of distress grants and other grants rolling up into a basic income grant. So is there direction on this? Because, of course, as the previous commentator mentioned, that someone has to pay for this basic income grant, and it's not every year we might end up with a windfall on the tax revenue side. If that isn't the case, which is more likely, I think, we may see a repeat, given that windfall in revenues collected this year, that would extend the social relief of distress, the 350 Rand grant, for a period to perhaps be disclosed by the Minister tomorrow.
And a lot of speculation, of course, around the announcement about Etolls. Is that something that you're going to be paying close attention to? Is that already a foregone conclusion?
I think on the priorities list, Etolls would perhaps fall lower down on that list. I think, just given the amounts involved here, that may have been a foregone conclusion. In other words, we might see money going to the Etolls due to the system not being effective in the way it was originally thought.
What should investors pay specific attention to with tomorrow's speech? How does it affect them in their pocket on an everyday level?
I think investors, rating agencies, or other people interested in the sort of longer-term future of the country would look out for things such as, on the negatives, what's happening to debt and deficit. Is this forecast to grow by even more over the coming years? And then, of course, on the expenditure side, is there a sort of focus on creating more growth in South Africa? Remember, I think one of the problems that has landed us in this position with lots of ends for expenditure and limited means is the fact that we've been growing rather slowly for the last, perhaps 5 or so years. And this is going to be an ongoing situation unless we do something critically to create a growth mandate in this economy. And that means, is there going to be spending on infrastructure? Is there going to be spending on stuff that would create service delivery or produce a base from which the private sector could come into the market as well, specifically in markets such as green energy, as well as perhaps improving of government services? All those type of expenditure items, I think, would be positive for investors because they would indicate that the future growth prospects of South Africa could be on the rise.
Looking at the context of the global economies and pressures all around the world at the moment, what should our expectations be in terms of long-term growth?
Well, the market is generally quite sober with respect to the growth prospects, at least to the short term. We've seen large increases in interest rates, not only in South Africa, but the rest of the world. These are expected to peak at the end of this year, perhaps only in early next year. And that means the growth prospects next year with these high interest rates making borrowing more expensive, both for businesses as well as for consumers, is obviously not going to be good for growth. But I think if one can resolve the sort of Ukraine crisis and we can see oil prices remain fairly constant at the levels they are at and not spike any more than this, we would see inflation coming down quite quickly again. And as I said, if we focus a bit on growth creating strategies in our economy, the prospects further than 1 or 2 years could be reasonably good.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to us. Everyone's going to be keeping an eye on that midterm budget speech tomorrow. That was KPMG's lead economist, Frank.